Human found the alien girl collapsing from heat shock and her body reacted violently to him alone. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the barren landscape into a shimmering oven. Heat waves rolled off the ground, distorting the air in every direction. Commander Jason Miller wiped the sweat from his brow as he adjusted the collar of his flight suit. The mission had been simple enough: scout the area, check the surroundings, and report back. But when Jason had stepped off the transport shuttle, he hadn't expected to find someone in distress. That's when he saw her, an alien girl, collapsed and gasping for air. Her skin was a soft, pale turquoise, her long silver hair matted with sweat, and her delicate frame trembling in the heat. She looked completely out of place in this scorched environment, and her body was clearly failing to handle the extreme temperatures. Jason's first instinct was to rush to her side, but he hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to approach. He wasn't familiar with her species, and he knew the risk of helping an alien could be unpredictable. Still, he couldn't just leave her there. As he knelt beside her, he felt the heat radiating off her, stronger than anything he'd ever felt. Her breathing was shallow, and her body seemed to be in shock. He hesitated, then placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, trying to stabilize her. That's when it happened. Her body jerked violently at his touch, her skin flashing a deep violet before she let out a low, guttural sound. Her eyes, which had been dim, suddenly flickered to life, glowing with an intense golden hue. She gasped, her body spasming as if reacting to something far deeper than the physical shock of the heat. Jason pulled his hand back quickly, his heart racing. What had just happened? She was shaking now, her breath coming in short, frantic bursts, and her entire body seemed to react to him in a way he hadn't expected. He'd helped people before, but nothing like this. She wasn't just affected by the heat, her body was responding to him, and it was violent. For a moment, all Jason could do was stare at her, trying to make sense of it. Was it the heat? Was it him? He didn't know. But one thing was clear: he couldn't leave her like this. Slowly, he reached forward again, this time placing both hands on her arms, keeping his touch light but firm. It's okay, he muttered, though he wasn't sure who he was reassuring more, her or himself. As he touched her, her body seemed to settle, the violent spasms subsiding. Her eyes, still glowing faintly, locked onto his, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of recognition in them. She wasn't just a stranger. She was more than that, something that felt otherworldly, yet her reaction to him was undeniable. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he knew one thing: this wasn't just about survival in the heat anymore. Something else was happening between them, something he couldn't understand but felt in every fiber of his being. Jason took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves as he looked at the alien girl in front of him. Her body had stopped convulsing, but her skin was still glowing faintly, a soft, eerie violet hue that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her rapid breathing. He couldn't shake the feeling that something far deeper was going on here than just the heat. It wasn't just the scorching sun or the deadly environment of this planet that had put her in danger, it was his touch. Slowly, cautiously, he reached out again, his fingers brushing against her arm, and once more, her body tensed in response. She shuddered, eyes widening, but this time, she didn't pull away. Instead, she locked eyes with him, her golden irises shimmering like stars in the dark. It was as if she was trying to communicate something that transcended words. Are you all right? Jason asked, his voice soft but firm. He wasn't sure if she understood him, but he hoped she could hear the sincerity in his tone. Her lips parted slightly, as if to speak, but no sound came. She seemed to be gathering her strength, and for a moment, Jason feared she might collapse again. But then, slowly, she managed to sit up, her body swaying slightly as she steadied herself. Jason instinctively moved closer, ready to catch her if she fell, but she looked up at him with an intensity that stopped him in his tracks. Her breath was steadying now, her violet skin still warm but not as overheated. The immediate danger had passed, but there was a new tension in the air between them. She was looking at him differently now, not with the confusion or fear he had seen earlier, but with a kind of recognition, like something had clicked into place. Jason had seen many different species, worked with countless alien races, but he had never felt anything like this before. It was as though they were bound together by something unspoken, something deeper than simple survival. Her eyes seemed to search his, like she was studying him, trying to understand him. "I don't know what just happened," Jason muttered, more to himself than to her. "But we need to get you to safety." He offered her his hand, an instinctual gesture, even though he knew she wasn't a fragile creature. She was strong, her body had shown that when it reacted so violently to his touch. Her hand hovered in the air for a moment, and Jason felt a rush of anticipation. Then, with surprising strength, she grasped his hand, her fingers cool against his skin. "Thank you," she said, her voice smooth and melodic, but it wasn't the words that caught Jason off guard. It was the tone, the depth of emotion behind them. It was as though she wasn't just thanking him for saving her life in the heat, but for something else, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Jason nodded, still trying to process the situation. "Let's get you somewhere cooler," he said, pulling her gently to her feet. As she stood, she seemed to regain her balance quickly, her body stabilizing with ease. She was a warrior, he realized, in a way. There was something in the way she carried herself, something that spoke of experience and strength. Despite the obvious shock to her system, she was resilient. They started walking, Jason keeping a close eye on her as they made their way toward the nearby shelter he had marked earlier on his map. The heat had drained him, too, but he couldn't afford to stop. Not now, not with her still by his side. Every step they took felt heavy with unspoken tension. Something was between them, something electric, and Jason couldn't deny that it wasn't just the heat that had caused his pulse to quicken. She felt it too, he could see it in the way her eyes followed him, the way her body seemed to lean just a little bit closer with every step. But neither of them said anything about it. They didn't have to. For now, survival was all that mattered. The heat was still unbearable, the sun relentless in its attempt to scorch everything in sight, but somehow, Jason felt the weight of the atmosphere shift as they moved toward the shelter. The alien girl, who had been so close to collapsing just moments ago, walked beside him with a steady grace, as though the collapse had never happened. Her presence was magnetic, like an invisible pull that Jason couldn't shake. Every time he glanced at her, her eyes locked with his, golden and intense. It was as if there was something between them, something unspoken that neither of them dared address. But it was there, lingering in the air. "We're almost there," Jason said, his voice steady but betraying a hint of unease. He wasn't sure if it was the heat, the strain of the mission, or something else that made his pulse quicken when he looked at her. She nodded, her movements fluid despite the earlier collapse, as if she were perfectly in tune with her surroundings. Jason had been trained for extreme conditions, but this felt different. The alien girl, whose name he still didn't know, seemed unaffected by the harsh environment in a way that was almost unnerving. It wasn't just that she was surviving, it was as though the environment bent around her, like she was in control of the very elements that had nearly killed her moments before. As they reached the shelter, a small, makeshift structure that Jason had spotted earlier, he guided her inside. The interior was cool, a welcome relief from the oppressive heat outside. He quickly activated the cooling systems, watching as the temperature inside dropped to a more manageable level. The girl sat down on a bench, still silent, her golden eyes watching him with a curiosity that sent a strange shiver down his spine. Jason busied himself with adjusting the controls, but he couldn't help but feel her gaze on him, like she was studying him, measuring him in ways that he couldn't comprehend. "You don't speak much, do you?" Jason asked, breaking the silence. She tilted her head slightly, a subtle smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I speak when I have something to say," she replied, her voice low and melodic. Jason raised an eyebrow, impressed by the calm authority in her tone. "I suppose that's fair," he said, though he wasn't sure what to make of her response. There was something about her that intrigued him, something beyond the alien nature of her species. Her eyes, the way they seemed to glow with knowledge and strength, made him want to know more about her. He realized, with a jolt, that he hadn't even asked her name yet. "What do I call you?" he asked, the question feeling strangely personal now that they were alone in the shelter. "Alicia," she replied simply, her voice steady. "Alicia," Jason repeated, the name sounding almost ethereal as it left his lips. "Well, Alicia, I don't know how you survived out there in the heat like that. I thought you were a goner for a second." Alicia's eyes flickered, the glow fading slightly. "I've been through worse," she said, her tone unreadable. "But your touch," Jason trailed off, unsure how to continue. Her reaction to him had been unlike anything he had ever experienced. It wasn't just the shock from the heat, her body had reacted violently when he touched her. Alicia turned her gaze toward him, her expression softening just a little. "My body reacts to things it doesn't understand," she said quietly. "You're different, human. I don't know why, but when you touched me, it was," she hesitated, as if searching for the right words, "intense." Jason felt his heart race again, but this time it wasn't from the heat. There was something more to what she had said, something that both unsettled and intrigued him. He didn't know how to respond, so he simply nodded. The silence between them stretched on, thick with unspoken tension. Jason was beginning to realize that this mission, this simple rescue operation, wasn't going to be as straightforward as he had hoped. There was more at play here than he could possibly understand. But one thing was certain. Alicia was no ordinary alien. And something about her presence was going to change everything. Jason sat down across from Alicia, the weight of the silence between them pressing heavily in the cool air of the shelter. The heat from outside had faded, but something else had taken its place, a sense of tension, an unspoken connection that neither of them fully understood. Alicia was still adjusting to the cooler environment, her skin now a soft shade of turquoise, a far cry from the glowing violet it had been earlier. She seemed more at ease, but Jason could sense the uncertainty still lingering beneath her calm exterior. "You said your body reacts to things it doesn't understand," Jason began, his voice steady but tinged with curiosity. "What do you mean by that?" Alicia looked at him, her golden eyes softening for a moment before she spoke. "My kind, we are not like humans. We are more attuned to our environment, to the energies around us. When something unfamiliar comes into contact with us, we react." Jason leaned forward slightly, intrigued. "So, my touch, was it because I'm human?" Alicia nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "Yes. I do not know why, but your presence, it is different. When you touched me, my body," she paused, searching for the right words. "It felt like a surge, a shock. I did not expect it. It was like my entire being reacted to something deeper than just the physical." Jason's mind raced as he processed her words. There was something in her tone, something almost otherworldly, that made him wonder if this was just a misunderstanding of biology or something far more complex. He couldn't deny that something had changed between them the moment he touched her. It wasn't just the physical sensation, it was the way his heart had raced, the way he had felt an undeniable pull towards her. It was as if, in that brief moment of contact, something inside him had shifted. But why? He hadn't known her long enough to understand what it meant, or if it meant anything at all. Alicia shifted slightly, her gaze still locked on him, her eyes studying him with an intensity that sent a strange chill down his spine. "I'm sorry if my reaction was unexpected," she said, her voice softer now. "I didn't mean to alarm you." Jason shook his head quickly. "No, it's not that. I'm just trying to figure out what happened. You're not like anyone I've ever met." She gave him a small smile, but it was fleeting. "And you are not like anyone I have met either, human." There was a slight hint of amusement in her voice, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Jason felt a strange sensation in his chest at her words. It wasn't just curiosity or attraction, it was something deeper, a pull that he couldn't explain. He had to admit, he was drawn to her in a way he hadn't expected. But he couldn't let himself get distracted. This mission was about survival, not about whatever strange connection seemed to be forming between them. "We need to figure out a plan," Jason said, trying to refocus. "We can't stay here forever." Alicia nodded, her expression hardening with resolve. "You're right. The heat outside is unbearable, but we cannot remain here. I need to find a way to return to my people. Jason didn't respond right away, his mind still processing everything. What if your people can't find you? He asked. What if they don't even know you're here? Alicia looked away, her gaze distant. They will know. Eventually. But there is something I need to do first. Before I return. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. Jason wanted to ask what she meant, but he knew better than to press her further. The last thing he wanted to do was make her feel cornered. He needed to focus on getting them both out of this mess alive. He had no idea what this planet was, where they were, or how long it would take to get help. But the one thing he did know was that Alicia's survival depended on him, and he wouldn't let her down. Jason stood up, stretching his stiff muscles. All right, let's take stock of our supplies and figure out what we can do. We've got to stay alive first. Everything else comes after. Alicia stood up as well, her movements graceful despite the earlier collapse. Agreed, she said, her voice steady. Jason couldn't help but notice how different she seemed now. The tension was still there, but she was more composed, more like the alien warrior he had imagined her to be. They had a long road ahead, but for the first time since they had met, Jason felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe they could make it through this together. Jason and Alicia spent the next few hours preparing for the journey ahead. The small shelter they had taken refuge in wasn't much more than a temporary stop, and they both knew they couldn't afford to stay there for long. Jason had gathered what supplies he could, checking his pack for water, ration packs, and a few basic tools, while Alicia sat quietly, her eyes scanning the outside, alert to any danger that might approach. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but it carried the weight of uncertainty. Jason couldn't help but glance at Alicia every so often, noticing the way she seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, her aura still shimmering with an almost ethereal quality. She had been quiet ever since their brief conversation earlier, but he could tell she was still processing everything that had happened. She was strong, no doubt about it. Jason had seen her resilience firsthand, but there was something else beneath that strength, a vulnerability that she had yet to reveal. He wasn't sure how much she trusted him yet, but that was something he'd have to earn, just as he would have to earn her trust in their survival together. Are you ready to move out? Jason finally asked, breaking the silence. Alicia turned her gaze toward him, her golden eyes reflecting the cool blue light of the shelter. Yes, she said, her voice steady but with an undertone that Jason couldn't quite place. But we need to stay cautious. The heat, the terrain, everything is unfamiliar to me. We must move carefully. Jason nodded, appreciating her practical approach. We'll stick to the plan. I'll lead the way, but we'll stay close. If anything comes up, we handle it together. Alicia stood up gracefully, her body still radiating warmth, though it was no longer the overwhelming heat from earlier. Understood, she replied simply. Together, they stepped out of the shelter, the harsh sun immediately greeting them again. Jason squinted against the brightness, adjusting his gear as he began to lead the way toward the mountain range he had spotted earlier on his map. It was a couple of miles away, but it was the only landmark he had to navigate toward. The journey was long and tiring, but they kept a steady pace, avoiding the midday sun where they could. Every now and then, Jason would look over at Alicia, who seemed to be moving with an ease he hadn't expected. Her alien grace was unlike anything he had seen, and though she moved silently, Jason was acutely aware of the presence she carried. He couldn't help but wonder what her species was like, what it would be like to understand her fully. What made her body react so violently to his touch? Was it just a biological anomaly, or was there something more to it? As they continued, Jason tried to focus on the task at hand. They had to reach the mountains before nightfall. It would be safer there, he hoped. The temperature would drop, and they might find shelter from the dangerous heat. Alicia, however, seemed lost in thought, her gaze fixed on the horizon, her eyes reflecting a deep sadness that Jason couldn't ignore. He didn't press her for answers, knowing she would speak when she was ready. But as they trekked onward, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that their journey together was just beginning. It was more than just a rescue mission now. There was something else, something unspoken, a connection that neither of them could explain but both felt. It was like the universe had thrown them together for a reason, and Jason couldn't help but wonder what that reason was. As the day wore on and the mountains slowly drew nearer, Jason couldn't help but glance over at Alicia again. She was more than just the alien he had found collapsing in the heat. She was someone with a story, a history, and something about her made him want to understand it all. Maybe, just maybe, they would find answers on this journey, answers about survival, about trust, and about whatever strange pull seemed to exist between them. The mountains were finally within reach, their jagged peaks cutting through the haze of heat that had been suffocating them all day. Jason and Alicia had managed to make steady progress, though the relentless sun still beat down upon them. Jason felt the weight of the hours bearing down on him, but he refused to stop. Every step forward was a step closer to safety, and he could see the faint outline of shelter just ahead, a cave hidden between the rocks, offering respite from the harsh landscape outside. Alicia had been quiet for most of the journey, her eyes distant as if lost in thought. Jason had noticed the shift in her demeanor, a change that seemed to deepen as they moved closer to their destination. He couldn't help but wonder what was going on in her mind. He had always prided himself on his ability to read people, but Alicia wasn't like anyone he had ever met. Her silence wasn't awkward or uncomfortable, but it was heavy, as if she were carrying something far beyond the physical exhaustion they both felt. "Are you all right?" Jason asked, his voice gentle but laced with concern. Alicia turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze. For a brief moment, her golden eyes flickered with something he couldn't quite place, regret, perhaps, or something more profound. "I am fine," she replied quietly, but Jason could tell it wasn't the full truth. He didn't press her for more. Instead, he just nodded and continued leading the way. The cave was a welcome sight when they finally reached it, a cool breeze sweeping through the entrance as Jason carefully stepped inside. He took a moment to assess their surroundings. There was enough space for them to rest, and the shelter would protect them from the elements. "This will do for now," Jason said, setting down his pack and stretching his tired muscles. He had been on his feet for too long, but the weight of the journey had made him more determined to push forward. Alicia followed him inside, her movements fluid and deliberate. She didn't seem to be as exhausted as Jason, though he knew better than to assume she wasn't feeling the toll of the day. She was tougher than she let on, but that didn't mean she wasn't human, or in her case, alien enough to feel the strain of the journey. Once they were both inside, Jason started organizing their meager supplies. They had enough food and water to last them for a few days, but that wasn't going to be enough if they didn't find a more sustainable solution soon. "We'll need to keep an eye out for resources," he said, more to himself than to her. Alicia sat down on a large rock at the back of the cave, her gaze drifting to the entrance. Her eyes were soft, almost wistful, as if she were lost in a memory. Jason didn't interrupt her, but he couldn't help but feel a strange pull to ask her what was on her mind. He wanted to understand her, to know what she was thinking, but he knew now wasn't the time to press her. She would open up when she was ready. As the hours passed and the sun dipped below the horizon, the temperature inside the cave dropped significantly, a welcome relief from the oppressive heat. Jason began to relax, allowing his muscles to unwind as the fatigue of the day caught up with him. "You should rest," he said to Alicia, who had remained motionless, her posture still straight despite the weariness evident in her features. Alicia gave him a small smile, but it was fleeting. "I do not require as much rest as you, human," she replied, her voice soft but steady. Jason chuckled, though he wasn't sure if she was joking or not. "Still, it wouldn't hurt to get some sleep," he said. "We've got a long road ahead." Alicia's gaze met his again, and for a moment, the weight of her stare seemed to hold him captive. "You are right," she said finally, her tone softer now. She stood up and moved to the far side of the cave, finding a spot to sit that was far enough away from Jason but close enough to hear if anything disturbed them during the night. Jason watched her for a moment, but then he turned away, focusing on the small fire he had started to keep warm. As the night wore on, Jason found himself unable to fully relax. There was something about the way Alicia moved, the way she carried herself, that unsettled him in the most curious way. It wasn't fear, no, it was something else entirely. Something that both intrigued and confused him. She was an alien, and yet, there was something deeply human about her, something that made him feel like he could connect with her. As he sat there, staring into the fire, Jason couldn't help but wonder what the future held for them. Would they ever make it back to her people? Would he ever truly understand what had happened between them? One thing was certain, the journey was far from over, and he was in it for the long haul. The morning arrived quietly, the sun creeping over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Jason woke to the sound of Alicia stirring beside him. She was already up, her posture straight and alert as always, her eyes scanning the cave's entrance. Jason stretched and rubbed his eyes, feeling the stiffness in his joints from the long night. He hadn't slept well, his mind kept wandering back to their strange connection, the pull he felt whenever Alicia's gaze met his. The questions had been lingering in the back of his mind, but there was no time for them now. They had to keep moving. "We should leave soon," Jason said, his voice hoarse from the dry air. Alicia turned toward him, her eyes still bright with the same intensity as the night before. "I agree," she replied. There was something about the way she said it, calm and resolute, that made Jason pause. He had been expecting her to seem more exhausted, but instead, she appeared as composed as ever. He couldn't help but marvel at her strength, both physical and mental. "I'm ready," she added, standing up smoothly and stretching her limbs, her movements almost fluid. Jason nodded and began packing their things. They had enough water and supplies to last them for a while, but the real challenge would be navigating the harsh terrain ahead. The mountains were still a long way off, and they needed to move quickly if they were going to avoid the worst of the heat. Jason strapped on his pack and moved toward the entrance of the cave. Alicia followed, and for a moment, they both stood at the mouth of the cave, taking in the view. The sun was climbing higher, the temperature already beginning to rise, and Jason knew they couldn't waste any more time. "Let's go," he said, turning toward the rugged path that lay ahead. They walked in silence for a while, the only sound the crunch of their boots against the dry ground. The heat was still oppressive, but the air was dry and cool enough for them to keep their pace. Jason kept his eyes on the horizon, mentally mapping their route as they moved forward. He could feel Alicia's presence beside him, steady and constant. She moved with a grace that was almost unnatural, her body seeming to adjust effortlessly to the harsh environment. Jason had to admit, he was impressed. He wasn't sure how much of it was her species' natural ability to endure, or if there was something more to her than met the eye. There were moments when he caught himself staring at her, captivated by the way she moved, the way she seemed to almost glide across the terrain. He quickly snapped his attention back to the path ahead, reminding himself that this was not the time for distractions. "Do you have any idea where we're headed?" Alicia's voice broke through his thoughts, calm and composed as ever. Jason glanced over at her. "The mountains," he said, pointing toward the distant peaks. "We can find shelter there. We'll figure out the next steps when we get there." Alicia nodded, but Jason could tell there was more on her mind. She had been quiet all morning, her eyes often distant, as if lost in thought. Jason didn't press her for answers. She would speak when she was ready. They continued on, their journey slow but steady. The further they walked, the more Jason became aware of the way Alicia seemed to navigate the world around her. There was an ease to her movements, a confidence that spoke of someone who had been through more than their fair share of hardship. As they approached the base of the mountain range, the temperature began to drop, a relief from the stifling heat they had endured all morning. Jason glanced up at the towering peaks, feeling a renewed sense of hope. They had made it this far, and now, they just had to keep going. "We're almost there," he said, turning to Alicia. She nodded but didn't say anything, her eyes still fixed on the mountains ahead. Jason could tell she was thinking deeply, but he didn't know what about. The silence between them was comfortable, but Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something important was on the verge of happening. Something that would change everything between them. They reached a small outcrop at the base of the mountains, where Jason stopped to check their supplies and take a quick rest. As he adjusted his pack, he looked over at Alicia, who was gazing up at the peaks, her expression unreadable. "What's on your mind?" he asked, unable to hold back his curiosity. Alicia turned to him, her golden eyes meeting his with an intensity that almost took his breath away. I have not been completely honest with you, human, she said quietly. Jason felt a knot form in his stomach at her words. What do you mean? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Alicia hesitated for a moment before speaking again. There is more to my presence here than just survival, she said, her voice steady but carrying a weight that Jason couldn't ignore. I am not just some lost traveler. I have a purpose. Jason's mind raced as he processed her words. A purpose? What could that possibly mean? Before he could ask more, Alicia turned away, her gaze fixed on the mountains once again. Jason didn't push her for answers. Not yet. He knew he had to be patient, but now more than ever, he couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was about to take a turn he couldn't foresee. Jason watched Alicia for a long moment, the weight of her words settling between them like a heavy fog. There was something about the way she said purpose that made him realize how little he knew about her, how little he understood of the world she came from. They had been traveling together for days now, and yet, it was as if he had only scratched the surface of what she was. What she had been through. What her true intentions were. A purpose? Jason repeated, his voice quieter than before. Alicia didn't turn to look at him right away. She remained standing, her gaze locked on the towering peaks of the mountain range ahead. For a long time, she didn't say anything. Jason began to wonder if she was going to ignore his question altogether, but then she spoke, her voice low and measured. My people, they are in danger, she said, her words hanging in the air, heavy with meaning. I was sent here to find something that could save them. But I was separated from the mission. Lost, if you will. Jason frowned, his mind racing as he tried to piece together the fragments of her story. What kind of danger? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady despite the question swirling in his head. Alicia turned to face him now, her golden eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his chest tighten. We have enemies. Powerful enemies. And they are coming for us. Her words carried a weight of finality, as if she had said this more times than she cared to admit. Jason felt a shiver run down his spine. He had known there was more to her than met the eye, but hearing her say it out loud brought everything into sharp focus. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? He asked, a little more forcefully than he intended. You could have said something, Alicia. I could have helped. Alicia's expression softened, but there was a sadness in her eyes that made Jason's heart ache. I didn't want to drag you into it, she said quietly. This is my burden to bear, not yours. But now that we are together, I can't hide it any longer. Jason was quiet for a moment, processing what she had said. The weight of her words was starting to sink in. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something far bigger, something Jason couldn't have imagined when he first stumbled upon her in the desert. So, what now? He asked, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of determination. We continue. We have to. Alicia's voice was steady, though there was an edge to it now, a quiet resolve that Jason hadn't noticed before. She had been carrying this burden alone for too long, and now, she had someone by her side. I will do whatever it takes to finish what I started, she continued. But I will need your help, Jason. There is much more at stake than you realize. Jason nodded slowly. I'm with you. Whatever it takes. He wasn't sure exactly what he had just signed up for, but in that moment, it didn't matter. Alicia had trusted him with something important, something that could change everything, and he wasn't about to turn away. Thank you, Alicia said, her voice soft, almost like a whisper. It was the first time she had said those words to him, and Jason couldn't help but feel a surge of pride, knowing that he had earned her trust. For the first time since they had met, the silence between them wasn't heavy, it was shared, as if they were both on the same page now, moving forward together. They turned their gaze back to the mountain range ahead. The path was still long, and there were many obstacles left to face. But Jason knew, without a doubt, that they would face them together. Alicia's purpose had become his own. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear, he wasn't going to let her go through it alone. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain, Jason and Alicia found themselves at the base of the mountain range. The air had cooled significantly, a welcome change after the oppressive heat of the day. The hike had been challenging, but they had made good progress. The shelter they had hoped to find was now just a few hundred yards away, hidden between two large rock formations. Jason stopped for a moment to catch his breath, his muscles aching from the long trek. He glanced over at Alicia, who, despite the grueling journey, appeared undeterred, her face calm and composed. It was impossible not to admire her resilience. She had been through so much already, yet she moved with the same grace and poise as when they first met. "Almost there," Jason said, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. Alicia nodded, her gaze fixed ahead. "I can sense it," she replied softly. Jason wasn't sure if she meant the shelter or something more, but he didn't ask. It didn't matter. They were close, and that was enough for now. As they reached the entrance to the shelter, Jason couldn't help but notice how different it looked as they approached it from this angle. The cave was smaller than he had originally thought, but it offered the perfect place for them to rest and regroup. The stone walls were rough, but there was a flat area large enough for them to settle in for the night. Alicia stepped inside first, her movements purposeful, and Jason followed, lowering his pack to the ground with a sigh of relief. The coolness of the cave was a welcome change from the heat outside, and Jason immediately began to take stock of their supplies. He had just finished setting up a small fire when Alicia spoke again. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice low and serious. Jason turned toward her, sensing the shift in her tone. He had known there was more to her story, and now, it seemed like she was finally ready to share. "What is it?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. Alicia's golden eyes met his, and for the first time, there was a vulnerability in her gaze that he hadn't seen before. "The mission I was sent on, it wasn't just to find something to save my people," she began, her voice steady but heavy with emotion. "It was to stop something. Something much more dangerous than I initially realized." Jason felt a knot form in his stomach. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "There are forces at play, Jason. Forces that are not just looking to destroy my people, they are looking to destroy everything. And I was chosen to stop them. I failed." The words hit Jason like a wave, a shock to the system that left him speechless. Alicia, the calm and composed alien warrior, had failed in her mission? How could that be possible? "What happened?" Jason asked, unable to hide the concern in his voice. Alicia hesitated for a moment, her eyes flickering as if searching for the right words. "I was betrayed," she said softly. "And now, the consequences of that betrayal are far worse than I could have ever imagined. If we don't act fast, there will be nothing left to save." Jason stared at her, his mind racing. He had known they were heading into something dangerous, but this? This was far beyond anything he had expected. "What can we do?" he asked, his voice determined. Alicia's eyes softened, but there was still an air of sadness about her. "There's a way to stop it," she said, "but we need to find the artifact. The one my people have hidden for centuries." Jason nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "And we can find it?" he asked. Alicia's gaze was unwavering. "We have to," she replied. Jason didn't hesitate. He wasn't sure exactly what they were up against, but he knew one thing: he wasn't going to let her face it alone. "Then let's do it," he said, his voice resolute. Alicia didn't say anything at first. Instead, she just nodded, her eyes filled with both determination and the weight of everything she had carried so far. Jason understood now. This wasn't just about survival. This was about saving everything they both held dear. And together, they would find a way to stop whatever was coming. The road ahead would be difficult, but Jason was ready. They both were.